Naomi, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you. I can't share my screen yet.
Okay, let me make you vote first.
Yes.
Can you try now?
Yeah, hold on a second. Can you see? Can you see my slides?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, great. Then
I'll let you know exact time to start now. Give us about 5 minutes.
okay, sure. Hmm? Hello, can people hear me? I I couldn't hear anything, but please let me know it when I can. Oh, okay. All right. So I can start. Okay, great. Okay, thank you. All right. Hold on. Okay. So, hello everyone. I'm Naomi Yamashita, a researcher at NTT Research Labs and professor at Kyoto University. Firstly, thank you so much, Dilrukshi, for all the arrangement, and sorry for not being able to be there in person since it's too close to the New Year's season. And if I traveled during this time period, I would be kicked out from my family, so apologies. Um, so for today's talk, well, actually, Dilrukshi asked me to give a talk about how to write a paper, write papers for SIGCHI conferences like CHI and CSCW. And well, I thought about it and I felt like it's easier to see things when you see examples of failed and successful cases. So today I'm going to offer a few examples based on my experience where a paper got rejected in the beginning, but then got accepted later on with some revisions. Right. Okay, how do I move to the next slide? Okay, good. So let me introduce myself a little bit. As I said, I'm a researcher at NTT Research Labs, which is located in Japan, also a professor at Kyoto University. And my research goal is about designing support tools for well-being, diversity, and inclusion. And my main research area is human-computer interaction with focus on collaborative and social technologies. And a little bit about my professional activities. I'll be chairing CHI 2025, which will be held in Yokohama. So I'd be happy to see you guys there. And I'm also on the SINCHI Executive Committee as a vice president for a membership. Okay. So today I'd like to offer two examples of my papers getting rejected initially and then later on getting accepted. The first one is related to choosing a research topic tied to a specific region. So the problem we tackled in this study involved numerous cultural factors. And when we tackle these problems, it is very likely that the reviewers do not understand the cultural context of those problems, which can lead the paper to a reject. So I'll introduce an example about that. And the second one is about the case where you often like develop a tool to improve a situation, a problem, right? And conduct a user study to evaluate that system. but discover that there's no improvement. Then, now after devoting so much time on a project, how can you publish a paper out of this? So I think a lot of you, face these situations. So like even it seems like a failure, but how do you still publish your paper in these conferences is an important thing, I think. So being a researcher living in Japan, it makes perfect sense for me to focus on the problems that are prevalent in Japan. For example, I've worked on topics like multilingual collaboration and mental health care. And as Japan is often cited as one of the countries with poor English skills. And so it was very easy to motivate myself to support non-native English speakers. Also, Japan has an extremely high suicidal mortal rate and which is double the global average. So, given these circumstances, the positive side of working on these topics is that I am familiar with these problems already, and it is also easy to find participants in my studies. Well, but however, there is also the downside of working on these kind of region-specific problems. So I would like to introduce one of my studies. This one, I ran a study with Soku Song, who was an intern from South Korea. And we were interested in supporting communication between husband and wife after childbirth to alleviate the issue of postpartum depression. And here's a video that shows how mothers in South Korea get stressed after a childbirth. I hope you can hear the sound. How do I play the video? Hold on. Oh, I hope you could hear the sound. Okay. Sorry. So given this background, and in this study, we first conducted an online survey with 32 fathers and 35 mothers living in South Korea to understand their needs. And then based on the survey results, we designed a mobile app. And basically the mothers wear a smart band, which can measure the mother's stress level and then share it with her husband who is working in office. Some of you might feel that this is a terrible idea, but finally we recruited 9 couples to engage with this app for 2 weeks to evaluate this system. Now, here are some findings from our online survey. Well, thankfully, most fathers were interested in knowing their wife's stress levels, also where they are, and whether they're getting enough enough rest, and so on. Which was quite nice. And additionally, many fathers wanted to know about their baby's status while they were working. Now, on to mother's side. Most mothers responded that they were willing to share about the baby's status with their husband at work. So like even if they already have a lot of things to do, they were willing to share the status with their husband at work so that they can be, continue being interested with the baby. And they also expressed a desire to communicate their stress level with their husband. This is pretty high. So that the husband can improve their understanding of the significant burden and stress associated with the childcare. And, it was kind of funny to see that the wives were less willing to share their location with their husbands. And I wonder why. But yeah, this was the case. And here's the system design. So mothers who stay at home, who take care of the baby wears a stress checker. And the stress checker deems a mother stressed when her heart rate increases rapidly without physical exercise. However, as you may already know, this can also happen when people get really excited, right? So we let mothers enter subjective signals to distinguish between bad and good stress. And when the system detects that the mother is having like a bad stress, then it sends a notification to her husband at work so that it can facilitate communication later on. Now, to evaluate the system, we recruited 9 families or, 9 couples in South Korea of single income families where fathers worked outside of their home and mothers were responsible for taking care of their babies at home. So, which is, the normal case of what is happening in South Korea. And the mothers were asked to wear the stress checker during their husband's working time to share their stress level. So from this feasibility study, we were interested in understanding whether the app triggered communication and, fostered a father's deep understanding of the child care responsibilities at home. So findings. Now, on the positive side, we found that the app helped the couples talk about their stress and improved communication. As you can see from this quote, a mother is saying, I always just vaguely describe myself as tired before using the app, but the app sends a notification when I felt very stressed. So we can talk at that time, and that improved our communication, so which was quite nice. And also, fathers showed better understanding of mother's parenting stress. So, as you can see from this quote, the father is saying, my wife usually doesn't talk about her parenting stress. However, after using the app, which clearly expressed difficulties and stress, we were able to discuss what caused her stress. Now, the mothers, reported having less stress due to improved father's emotional support, which was also nice. Here, the mother is saying, my husband asked what went wrong with me and the baby, what went wrong with me and the baby when my stress level was high. I liked wearing the smart band because I felt that I was being watched over. And the father also saying that I knew that my wife was still recovering from childbirth. But when I noticed that she was stressed, I talked to her more and expressed my concern for her. So these were all, nice things which happened because of introducing the app. But of course, there were some downsides of using the app, like this first one, which was quite funny. The mother is saying that when I was cleaning up a dirty diaper, I was actually not stressed, but the app showed high stress. So I pretended to be stressed and entered a negative icon. And I was glad I got a phone call from my husband. So these things, happen, right? And also fathers gradually became insensitive to stress information as they received these kind of information every day. Like this father saying, I got an average of 2 high stress notifications every day. And during the initial days, I called her a few times, but the situation didn't seem so serious. I felt I don't have to pay attention to it anymore. Now, finally, well, some also complained, typically the fathers complained about the asymmetric nature of the system, only sharing mother's parenting stress with fathers and not vice versa. So like this father is complaining, I know my wife is stressed by childcare, but I also want to express my stress to her about his work. Like it is unfair to allow only mother can express her stress, which is understandable, right? Now, so our paper got rejected when we submitted this paper. And well, this is how we wrote the paper, like the background. So it generally talks about like how postpartum stress happens, and it could lead to depression, like more generally and more broadly around the world. However, some reviewers argue that in general, the app seems to have not been designed to support equity in family relationships. Some reviewers also say that the system seems to reinforce gender-based role division. And, like after getting these reviews comments, we realized how hard it is to gain an understanding of the cultural context we are embedded in. We were not trying to support equity in family relationships. Although, yes, this is something we need to think about. But we developed an app, like an intentionally asymmetric tool, not to reinforce or perpetuate inequality, but to address the problems caused by the existing imbalance in parenting roles. So these imbalance, like asymmetry already is embedded in our society, and we wanted to balance by introducing like a asymmetric tool. But it was difficult to get this understood by some reviewers. So it became really important for us to explain the cultural context in the paper. So after this paper got rejected, we rewrote the background. Basically, we added another section talking about the inequality in parenting role in East Asia. So yeah, we explained that there's like this like gender imbalance in our society, and how, um, these parenting stress happen, like is centered around mothers. And then it got accepted. So I'm saying that it's important to explain the cultural context when you tackle these region focused problems. Okay, so now moving on to the next example. Many of us based on theories or prior research findings, we come up with some ideas to improve a problem, and then design a system to implement the idea and conduct an experiment or a user study to evaluate the system. However, there are many cases, or I would say it's often the case, where the evaluation doesn't go well as intended. And here I'm going to offer an example of such a case, and getting my paper rejected first, but then got accepted after revision. And I'm going to explain how we did that. So here are the initial scores of my paper. Like I submitted to Kai first, and then AC, who's a meta reviewer, gave a 2 out of from 1 to 5. So 1 is a strongly reject, 5 is strongly accept. So this is like weak reject, like middle and weak reject. So when, you can see that the scores look pretty hopeless. And we rewrote the paper, submitted to CSCW, and got accepted. It is like got pretty high scores overall, and I'm going to explain how this happened. So let me first explain the motivation of this work. So about, like more than 10 years ago, I would say, I asked people around me, like Japanese colleagues who served for more than 10 international committees. So, these people who were considered leaders in this research field, and about their ability to follow and contribute to international meetings, like organizing committee meetings and such. And you can see that, like out of 7 non-native speakers, like, so NNS means non-native speakers. So out of out of 7, 4 said that they could understand more than 80% of the conversations in face-to-face meetings, which is understandable, right? And however, when it comes to contributing to a meeting, meaning how much they could speak up during those meetings, the percentage drops. But still, most of them reported they can say more than half of what they wanted to say in face-to-face meetings. Now, however, when we asked the same questions when they used audio calls, their response changed dramatically. Now, I should explain why audio calls, right? So, well, nowadays, like we use Zoom, we use video calls for group meetings, but there was a time when people primarily used voice calls for such gatherings, like more than 10 years ago. So this was a time when people started to shift from like email exchange, a bunch of email exchange, and they started to use audio calls to make swift group decisions. And at that time, I remember quite vividly that people around me were expressing frustration about no longer having their ability to influence decisions because of the rapid decision-making process. And when I asked them how much they could understand and contribute in these audio calls, the comprehension level drops dramatically, as you can see here. And also, like 5 out of 7 people said that they could not say even half of what they wanted to say. So I thought this is a terrible situation, especially in our country, to influence like those like important decisions. So I looked into this more carefully and, what is causing the problem? And I figured out that, more than the problem of low language skills, because they could understand, 80% of what is said in face-to-face, but why does it drop so dramatically on audio calls? It's because they're suffering from lack of resource. Like they have to process so many things at the same time, especially during audio calls when there's like speech overlaps or some background noises. And native speakers can easily overcome those and compensate the missed information with the context or whatever. But this imposes like high burden on non-native speakers, and which requires a lot of resource from them. And it becomes challenging to process them all simultaneously. So based on this, I came up with an idea. If non-native speakers are lacking resource, why don't we give them resource, right? So in this case, I thought about like giving them small amount of time for them to process information. So the idea was to insert short gaps between native speakers' speech so that they can process the native speaker's speech. For example, let's say these are the sound waves of native speaker 1, and this is the sound wave of native speaker 2. Then by adding a small gap, short gap, it will allow non-native speakers to give a little bit of time to process what native speaker 1 said. So I tried doing this, and like you can hear, I'm going to play audio, like which is the recording of 3 or 4 native speakers talking. And okay, here we go.
We really do need a good speaker recognition technology. Well, I think that's true.
Plug.
I think speaker recognition and face recognition are important technologies in
Oh, yeah.
fighting terrorism.
Okay, so this was the original recordings of native speakers talking, and I inserted 0.4 second gaps in between native speakers' speech, and I'm going to play it.
We really do need a good speaker recognition technology.
Well, I think that's true. I think
Plug.
I think speaker recognition and face recognition are important technologies
Oh yeah.
in fighting terrorism.
So, I don't know how you felt while listening to this, but for non-native speakers, it sounds like the speech speed is not changed, but we feel like the speech speed has dropped. This is quite interesting. And, I inserted these like short gaps in between the native speaker speech in a pre-recorded meeting and tested whether it improves non-native speaker comprehension. And as you can see, there's a clear increase of non-native speakers' comprehension of these speech, native speakers' speech. So this was pretty successful, and I would say that this is like the main findings of this study. And so this went pretty well in pre-recorded meetings. Now you might be wondering how are you going to do this in real-time meetings, right? So here's what I did. I implemented a delay control system, which insert artificial delay only in between native speakers' speech. So here it's how it goes. So let's say there are like 4 native speakers and native speaker 1 talks at time 0. And then his speech is going to be, it will be delivered directly to the non-native speaker at time 0, approximately time 0. However, the other native speakers hear his speech at time 1 with a small amount of delay. And let's say that native speaker 3 is going to talk after native speaker 1 with a small overlap at time 2, which often happens in group meetings, right? There's a small overlap. However, her speech is also going to be delivered first to non-native speaker. And as you can see, since non-native speaker listened to native speaker 1's speech earlier than her, so the overlap is gone, and instead there's likely to be a short gap in between these speech. And when non-native speaker wants to speak up, then her speech is going to be delivered directly without delay to the native speakers. So this is how I try to introduce like small gaps in between native speakers' speech. Now, we ran a study with 14 groups where each group engaged in 3 group discussions, each with varying gap durations, like with no gap, 0.2 seconds gap, and 0.4 second gap. And here are the results. So, things did not seem to improve with the 0.4 second delay. In fact, it got worse than no delay. So, things got really worse, unfortunately, at 0.4 delay. And non-native speaker slightly performed better with 0.2 second delay, but this was not statistically significant. So, and like we wondered like why things got worse at 0.4 second delay. And the interviews revealed that native speakers, they got frustrated with added delay. And in fact, they spoke faster. And, so these kind of like negative influence on the native speakers also like indirectly impacted the non-native speaker. So which led to that result. But anyhow, like we like wanted to write a paper out of this. And, it was a bit of challenge to write a paper given these, results, non-significant results. And the paper we initially submitted to Kai looked like this. And the title was How Can We Support Non-Native Speakers in an Audio Conference? And we presented two studies. The first one is a preliminary study, and it talks about how short gaps can improve non-native speaker comprehension. And the second one is about like how gaps may help non-native speakers' speech. And in the abstract, we described the contribution of the paper as, we found that there is an optimal range, 0.2 second delay, that benefits the non-native speakers without hampering the native speakers. So yeah, this was a little bit challenging to say because there was no significant results, but still, I felt like there was no choice. And also the results showed like consistently that with 0.2 second delay, things slightly improved. So yeah. However, the reviews were quite negative. Like starting from like 3 reviewers pointed out the flaws in the methodology and the data analysis. They said that without comparing it with native speakers, it is not very convincing whether those issues are particularly faced by non-native speakers or are commonly shared by all conference attendees. Well, to me, this didn't really make sense, but that's okay. And 2 reviewers said that this solution seems impractical in real settings because there will be already delays outside of the laboratory setting, which makes sense. Also, 2 reviewers said that results are overstated. Yes, I overstated. They are not sufficient to support the paper claims. So, out of this, like how did I change the paper and made this like to be accepted, right? Now as I said, to me, the first one, it didn't really make sense to conduct the preliminary study with native speakers, but we ran the study with native speakers. And as you can see, there was a ceiling effect and native speakers' scores did not change across conditions. So, fine. Like you can see that only non-native speakers are benefiting from this. So we can say that this support is, this is aimed for non-native speakers. And for the comments which seemed more fundamental, we decided to discard the goal of supporting non-native speaker because it actually did not support non-native speakers, right? So instead, we reframed the paper to explore the impact of transmission lags on multilingual collaboration. So the paper title was initially, How Can We Support Non-Native Speakers in Audio Conferences? But we failed, right? And so instead, we reframed the paper and said, like, we want to see like how transmission lags enhances and deteriorates multilingual collaboration. Now, in line with this reframing, we also updated the contribution. So instead of claiming that we found an optimal range of delay that benefits non-native speakers, we simply reported the findings, which, we found that a combination of beneficial and detrimental effects for both native and non-native speakers. And the resubmission was taken pretty positively by reviewers. The AC, the meta reviewer, saying that I would argue for acceptance. Some might be put off by the negative results of the paper, but I found that the paper nevertheless provides a useful contribution to the field by uncovering various aspects of the complexity of online conference interaction among groups of native and non-native participants. So the important lesson here is to focus more on what the community can learn from the study rather than what you want to claim. Especially when we develop a system, we hope that the system works well and achieve its goal of supporting users, right? But if it does not, it's still fine. You can focus on the reasons why and how it didn't go well. And then you still have hope that the paper gets accepted. Okay, so well, I was hoping to give you another example like this, but unfortunately I ran out of time for creating slides. So I'm going to present one of my works I've conducted in collaboration with EJ Lee and his advisor, Yoon Hwang, where EJ joined my team as an intern. And, this was a pretty successful study using mixed methods, meaning we had both quantitative and qualitative analysis findings to back up our claims. And I thought I would just bring it up because, human AI interaction is such a hot topic nowadays. So this research is wait, before moving on, should I take questions or should I take questions at the end?
Maybe take questions in the end.
Okay, I'll do that. All right. So this research is motivated by the fact that there are so many people who have mental health concerns, but reluctant to access mental health care services. So, for this purpose, we think chatbot is a good fit because previous research has shown that people tend to disclose more about themselves to a chatbot than to a real human. And in fact, using chatbots in mental health domain is not new. For instance, WooBot provides treatment to patients by delivering cognitive behavioral therapy known as CBT. And there are also other services around the world already, there are users using it. So, however, our goal is not to develop a chatbot that substitutes for a doctor. There are so many risks and ethical concerns for a chatbot to completely take over a doctor. So ultimately, we want people or humans to care for one another. So we started working on designing chatbots that mediate communication between care recipients and caregivers. So first, building relationship between users and the chatbot. And then chatbot introduce a real human expert as a trustworthy person. And then we wanted to see whether a user can feel trust towards the expert and willing to meet him in real life. And which, by the way, happens if this chatbot was a real human, right? Because when we talk with friends and you hear about your friend talking about another person and you hear good things about that person, then even though you do not know that person in real life, you feel like you know that person, or you at least have a good impression of that person. So, we wanted to see if that similar thing happens even with a chatbot. So we ran 2 studies, and the first one, the goal is to to explore an effective chatbot design for eliciting deep self-disclosure. Now, according to social penetration theory, reciprocity and time are key elements to build deep relationship among humans. And so, disclosure should happen from both sides. No, like deep, like a relationship does not happen if like only one person keeps on disclosing. So disclosure has to happen from both ends. And so based on this, we designed 3 types of chatbots, varying in the level of chatbot self-disclosure from no disclosure to high disclosure. And the study was a between subjects design. So we had 3 groups of participants, and each group using one type of chatbot. And here the participants chatted with the chatbot every day for about 10 minutes for 3 weeks. And the everyday chatting task consisted of 3 sessions. First, journaling, followed by small talk, and then sensitive questions. For example, in the journaling session, the chatbot would ask questions like, how are you today? How are you, how are you feeling? And, like what happened today, things like that. And in the small talk, the chatbot would ask questions like, what is your favorite thing to do on vacation? And for sensitive questions, the chatbot would ask really sensitive questions like, have you ever experienced any abusive behavior from your friends, family, or stranger? And these are really sensitive questions, as you can see. And because we expected that some participants wouldn't want to disclose these kind of very sensitive questions, these answering to these questions were optional, and they didn't receive any penalty for not answering to them. And, the journaling and sensitive questions sessions, these 2 sessions were exactly the same among the 3 groups. But the small talk sessions was the treatment session where the high disclosure chatbot talked about their personal experience in the past and revealed more feelings about it. And whereas, low disclosure chatbot talked in more general terms and it did not talk about its personal experience or personal feelings about itself. And this was no disclosure. So it just kept on asking questions. Now, as you can see, the chatbot is like just an autonomous chatbot, and the participants knew that these were autonomous chatbots. So even though the chatbot talked about its personal experience or feelings, participants knew that these were fake. The chatting interface was a regular messenger interface, which looked like this. Okay, so now the findings. This graph shows the average word counts of each group. As you can see, participants who interacted with the high disclosure chatbot, which is group 3 in orange, wrote more contents compared to other groups as time passed by. Like in the beginning, there was almost like no difference, but you can see that gradually the difference becomes large. We also manually coded the depth of self-disclosure, not just how much they wrote, but the depth of self-disclosure from 0 is lowest and 3 is the highest. And these graphs show that the average depth of self-disclosure for each group. So the orange is group 3 with high disclosure chatbot. And blue is the no chatbot disclosure. And here, as we can see, that participants disclosed more deeply about their feelings and thoughts over time when they interacted with the high disclosure chatbot, as you can see. You can see that depending on the topic they talked about, some participants there's nothing to disclose about, so they don't talk much, or they don't have feelings to share or thoughts to share. But you can still see that there's a discrepancy between the groups. And here are the qualitative findings from the interviews. And in the interviews, participants who interacted with the no disclosure chatbot, which is group 1, expressed boredom and sometimes complained the impoliteness of chatbot asking such sensitive questions. Like here, here a participant said, "I felt the chatbot did not understand what I said because it just asked me a question and moved to the next one. I felt the chatbot was a little impolite." And on the other hand, participants who interacted with high disclosure chatbots seemed to feel comfortable sharing their personal things with the chatbot. As you can see from this quote, the chatbot sometimes shared its own experience and thoughts when asking me a question. Its answers also included details and thoughts, so I felt it was my responsibility to answer its questions seriously. So as you can see from this quote, some mentioned that they felt responsible for answering to the chatbot's questions because the chatbot also shared personal experience with them. This is interesting because, given that the participants knew that they were talking to an autonomous bot, meaning that they knew that the stories told by the chatbot were all fake, but still they felt that they were responsible and they talked more and they revealed more about themselves. Now, regarding the effects of time, as I mentioned earlier, the participants in the no disclosure group expressed boredom and said that they were annoyed for being asked similar questions every day. And, this is consistent with the word count graph, where the word counts of the no disclosure group dropped after the first few days. And like, as you can see from this quote, the participants saying that gradually it became less enjoyable. And I don't like being asked the same questions again and again. But in contrast, the participants in high disclosure group expressed high intimacy with the chatbot, as one mentioned. 2 weeks ago, when I started talking with the chatbot, I felt that I was talking to a robot. As I chatted more, I felt more intimate with him and knew him better. So now I'd like to share things with the chatbot over the long term. And it was kind of interesting because, about when they talked about sensitive things about themselves, it was only them who were disclosing. And the chatbots were only disclosing like shallowly in the small talk sessions, but the chatbots did not disclose about like sensitive things. So, but still they felt like, participants felt like they were more intimate and they wanted to continue using the chatbot, which was quite interesting. And, we researchers were talking like, what's going on? Like, why do they want to keep using this? Now, the second study, which was like, to me, it was more interesting than the first study. The second study was, actually an extension of the first study. So we built on the first study. The aim of the second study was to explore whether a chatbot can mediate trust, or, how to design a chatbot that can mediate trust. And if it can, then it means that chatbot has the potential to mediate communication between the care receiver and the caregiver without making them feel that their privacy is invaded. So as I said, this one was the extension of the first study. So after the 3-week study about users disclosing about their stuff, and the chatbot introduces Dr. Yamamoto as a reliable psychiatrist living in the same district, and suggests to share the disclosed data with him. And if there's a need, Dr. Yamamoto would contact them directly through email or phone call. And the chatbot starts reviewing the data one by one during the 3 weeks of disclosure, and asks whether the participant is willing to share each of the disclosure with Dr. Yamamoto. And the participants were allowed to, say no, they don't want to share it with Dr. Yamamoto, or they could also tweak the text and edit the data. So we were interested in like how they would want to do that. But here there's a trick. Actually, for group 3, where chatbot had like high disclosure, the chatbot had already talked stories about Dr. Yamamoto in their small talks. And so, like just like we do in our daily chattings. So the chatbot talked about, good stuff about Dr. Yamamoto during the 3 weeks of chatting. And so only the participants in group 3, when the chatbot introduced Dr. Yamamoto, the participants in group 3, they already knew who was Dr. Yamamoto through these chatting sessions. Now here are the results. Well, this is only a questionnaire result, which asked about their trust level towards the chatbot and Dr. Yamamoto. Oh, sorry, I forgot to put the y-axis, but basically it's like from 1 to 5, where participants were asked to give scores about like how much they trusted the chatbot and Dr. Yamamoto. And as you can see here, this part is kind of interesting, that you can see that participants seem to feel that Dr. Yamamoto is more trustworthy when the chatbot shared good stories about him during the 3 weeks. Well, rather than just the questionnaires, we were interested in how the participants actually behaved. So as I mentioned earlier, the chatbot reviewed the data one by one with the participants and asked whether they were willing to share those stories with the psychiatrist. And here we calculated like how much people were willing to really share those data. And overall, you can see that the participants were happy to share their disclosure with the doctors. They, in the interviews, they basically said that they can trust a doctor because they are doctors. So not because they heard about the doctor, but basically they trust people who are doctors. But there were some interesting trends when you looked more closely into the data. Here, participants sometimes deleted content, and this was found the most in group 1 and least in group 3. And participants, conversely, the participants in group 3 were willing to clarify and add more content so that the Dr. Yamamoto understood about their stress more. So, which is pretty like interesting. So like here's the end of my talk. And now before I close my talk, I just want to, briefly talk about this topic here, which says, what is it like to be an HCI or CSCW researcher in Japan? Because like I get these questions more and more recently, so I thought maybe I can talk a little bit about this in the end. So, like, what is it? Well, being an HCI researcher in Asia, like typically in Japan, there are a lot of tech-oriented people, and like who develop these like inventing these interesting like new sports and like using new technologies and like love gadgets. Right. And they develop all these kind of interesting tools, and, which is fun and exciting, but sometimes it's hard to gain understanding from other fields. So I sometimes have a hard time, like trying to convince people like this is like serious research, yeah. Well, but however, there are also like, of course, like positive sides of being a new HCI researcher in Asia. In my case, especially, well, being a female researcher and like also an industry researcher living in Asia, this means, well, it is difficult at some points. Like especially when you're younger, it's difficult to find collaborators and stuff. But also it means there are more opportunities to get invited to important committee roles. So like here are some like main like the committee roles that I've engaged in. First, I started with 2008 and 9 about serving on domestic research committee roles, like very small gatherings. At that time, I already published 1, 2, 3, 4 papers. But like started gradually, and then being on a program committee at Kai Work in Progress, and then gradually starting up, and then boom, like 2012, like suddenly I got a position for CSCW steering committee. This never happens if I lived in the US, I would say. So this, because I knew this person who was on the steering committee, like a chair. And then this person like appointed me, like, and brought me into the steering committee. And because I had no knowledge about like these like roles, and like I've never taken these important positions, it was honestly very difficult for me to contribute. I was silent and very quiet during all of these meetings. And still, I mean, like I was, people were very kind, and it was like a good learning experience for me. Which later on I built up my career through these committee roles. And then, as 2025, I'm going to be the general chair. So what I'm saying is that, there are more opportunities if and open for these important committee roles if you're a researcher living in Japan. So it's not, what I'm trying to say is that, it's not just purely difficult, but there are some good sides of being a researcher in Asia. Okay, thank you very much. This is the end of my talk. I'd be happy to take any questions.
You could hear their clapping, right?
Yes.
Okay, so here's how we will do it. Raise hand if you have a question and unmute yourself and ask the question, right? Okay. Okay, we have a different way of doing that. Unmute and then, okay. Mute.
Oh, sorry, I'm not hearing anything.
Okay, so you can unmute your, oh, let's come here. Hi. Hello, Dr. Naomi.
Hello.
Yes, from Bangladesh. I had a question about when you check the chat bot that had higher disclosure ratio versus the
Yes.
lower disclosure ratio. So
Yes.
you said some of them engaged in deeper conversation. So wanted to know how you measured that, like depth in conversation. So was curious to know about that.
Okay, so I guess you're talking about this slide.
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes, yes. So we had two coders measuring the depth of feelings, and we had some examples like this is like no disclosure of feelings, no disclosure of thoughts, and this is like level 1, level 2, level 3, and we had two coders coding those, and we calculated their average.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
So it's not a standardized like depth measurement or
No.
emotion measurement, nothing like that. Like how
No.
long they engaged in a topic, more of that. Okay, thank you
Yes.
so much. It's
Yes.
lovely research.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your presentation and cover what I was speaking from you on. And can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So one can get frustrated by submitting a paper and getting a rejection, as you showed, cultural sensitivity about the role of women, man in your first research,
Yes.
draw attention of the reviewers who said that this is not being equity, and then you wrote a new paragraph and you submitted again. But
Yes.
one can easily become frustrated when doing a lot of work and not being able to publish at the first run. How do you deal with frustration in research? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes. Especially I feel frustrated because when those studies are conducted in, in the US or, those major countries, you don't have to write those paragraphs, but, yeah.
Any other questions? I also had a question. I'm trying to remember because I think it was the trust research. I don't think I remember the participants demographic in the sense like, you know, does trust comes with the cultural norms? Because let's say if you have taken all the Japanese participants, and how
Mm.
do you think how would that be different from the others? If I can remember, those were all Japanese or just
w- we conducted this experiment with Japanese, Chinese, Korean, potential Korean. Yeah, so it was not Japanese, but well, yeah, but people live in Asia, so they might share some I don't know, some common trust feature or something. But yeah. Yeah, that is true.
and also I really like the fact that you showed how you turned your rejected papers to. Thank you so much. That's so needed in this conversation which we couldn't have. Thank you so much for that. And I think you were to share one more thing, but we have time. We have 15 minutes. If you have prepared, maybe we can hear that too.
Yes, I can do that. Yeah. Yes, yeah, because we, in talks, we normally just get to see the successful side of all the research, but actually, there are lots of failure behind the studies. So yeah, I thought it might be useful. Yeah, and I'm glad to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah, come. So if you're nervous to come here, please don't. Like, if you have questions, please come because we have time. Yeah, comments. Sit down, we come from the.
Hello,
Hello.
Pavel again. Do you hear me?
Yes.
A question that is maybe out of scope of what you presented, but as you said that all research in this stage being done in Japan, specifically in Asia. I'd like to know whether you see the future in terms of midterm future and long-term future. Would it be a future that would be, an AI society driven by technological determinism and technological utopianism, or do you see a socio-technical future? Because it seems that in Japan, everything is being driven by smart agents, both in terms of smart city and how the decisions are being made. In terms of robotic, Japan is at the forefront of all sorts of advancement in technology, but I would like to see whether you think there is a chance that the future would also be socio-technical instead of techno-engineering. Thank you.
Yes, I agree. Like so some of the technologies and stuff like, for example, like emoticons started from like these, like Japan or these countries. Like cultures are very important. And yes, and as you know, well, especially Japan, they were very slow at like developing AIs and stuff, and so they want to they don't want to the law to create laws that restrict those AI from influencing the society. They want to take advantage and they want to lead and see how AIs, especially like as you said, like robots and stuff, can support people, especially like here. We are in a very like high elderly society. And there are less and less people, young people who can take care of the aged population. So, robots, we have to use robots. We have no choice but using robots and stuff for caring purpose. And so, I think yeah, there's a chance that like Asian countries take the lead in these areas.
Okay, we have another question. You can try. First, Laya. First.
Hi, Dr. Naomi. So
Hello.
I'm a chatbot designer. So I was kind of curious about the chatbot scene in Japan. So I know that in Japanese there are different politeness levels, keigo. So usually in Japanese chatbots, what kind of keigo? Is keigo even used? Or if it is used, what type of keigo is used?
Ah, I see. So in this study, we well, we develop a chatbot using English. So we kind of avoided like using chatbots using those like keigo kind of respect language, because it will like complicate things. And when we translate those into English, I thought it's going to be very difficult. So when I said like Chinese, Korean, and Japanese, we recruited people who are fluent in English. So mainly international students and students studying in those like foreign language schools and stuff. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. But in general, I wanted to know what Japanese chatbots, what type of politeness Japanese chatbots have. In general, what is the industry practice?
Yes. So in general, they use yes, they use keigo. So they use like respectful terms so that the users do not get upset or do not become upset to the chatbots. So yeah, normally, but when they use keigo, we feel a little distance from them, from the chatbots. So in the future, if we want to develop like friends kind of chatbots, I think it would be important not to use those kind of respectful terms. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have another question.
Hello,
Hello.
can you hear me? This question is mainly related to the empirical studies that you have done, especially related to the well-being, the social well-being of individuals. So can you actually specifically indicate what certain problems or the limitations that you have encountered when you're doing such research in the Asia? Because you specifically indicated what it is like to be an HCI researcher in Asia. That's why my question goes towards there. So please go
You
ahead.
mean doing research on mental health care, you mean?
Yes.
I think the biggest problem is that there's like a huge social stigma about these like mental illness. I think, well, in other like Western countries too, they have these stigmas around these mental illness, but still, I mean, people are more understanding, trying to understand the illness. And I see those people suffering from mental illness still serving on important roles in the society. However, in Japan, or like I would think that broadly in Asia, the social stigma is stronger. And so once you, for example, you get depressed and you have depression and people notice that you have depression, clinical depression, then it is very unlikely that you get an important role at work. So these social stigma is pretty tense, and so which means it becomes difficult to tackle these problems because people basically want to hide, right? So actually, initially, when I started this study, I tried to, when I started doing research on depression, I tried to contact people, family caregivers who are taking care of depressed individuals. But I found it very difficult. And also, even though I interviewed some of the family caregivers who are looking after depressed individuals, they don't say the truth. Like they try to hide certain things. And the recruitment was really, really difficult. So then I've kind of failed in getting participants. So after that, I tried a different way of recruiting participants, namely recruiting them through a marketing company, where the marketing company have all the data about the drugs prescriptions. And so through that data, they can recruit people who are purchasing medicines on like certain mental illness. And there I could like directly recruit them and without influencing their family members or without impacting any of their social personal networks. So I found that recruitment itself is pretty challenging, and it impacts the whole dynamics and the kind of data that you can get from the study. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, at the interest of time, maybe I just wanted to say thank you again, Naomi. We would really love you to have in Sri Lanka in upcoming any session to Sri Lanka. And I have to especially thank Naomi because this winter school will not be successful if it's not her, because she and we both together wrote the proposal to CSCW to get the funding to bring you here in Sri Lanka. So she actually played a pivotal role in that.
Thank you. Thank you. I
And
really hope,
we
I could be there.
hope to
Yeah.
see you in Sri Lanka.
Yes.
Is she speaking maybe? Can hear. But now that she's leading the 2025 CSCW, let's aim at least one or two papers from South Asia. And I hope that you will bring, some programs so that we can, have more South Asian participants to the CSCW, and we'll keep this conversation active, and we'll contact you to CSCW, local chapters again. Thank you so much, Naomi.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for listening to my talk. Hope to see you again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.